Hey guys, welcome back to Crimson Shinobi. Today's fanfic is, what if Naruto became the bloodthirsty Jinchuriki of Konoha? Part 1. If you enjoy it, please like, subscribe, and support the channel for daily Naruto fanfics. Now, let's begin. 6 years ago, Fire Country, Konohagakure. An untouched blonde 6-year-old boy walked impassively to the man bleeding profusely in the middle of the black alley. The small shirt he wore displayed a swirl splattered with scarlet liquid. The man coughed and held the fatal wound on his side, blood sputtering from his mouth and drizzling down his chin. His shinbone stuck out halfway from the top of his knee, the kneecap leaning on the back of it from its severed connection and leaving him completely immobile. His shoulder was torn open from the abnormally sharp nails the blonde currently wielded. He looked up in fear as the child towered over his submissive form, narrowing the large light blue eyes on his whiskered face. In one final act of desperation, he sat up a bit and pleaded, "No, please, get away, you monster. No, I don't want to die. Please, I'll do anything, anything." His pitiful request was cut short as the child kneeled and grasped the victim's neck with burning eyes, his knife-like nails hooking themselves into the vulnerable skin. The boy's prey widened his eyes in horror before he heard the last word that would ever grace his ears again. Pathetic. The boy pushed his fingers toward each other and through the neck not a moment after. Blood gushed onto his small hand as the man let out a noisy gasp, but he didn't stop there. Allowing his mouth to twitch up into a sinful smirk while his canines shone brightly, the small killer ripped the jugular vein from its host effortlessly as one final cry of pain cut its way through the cold night air. The limp corpse fell back onto the ground as the child tossed the esophagus uncaringly to the side. His heart was racing from the thrill of the whole situation, and his maniacal smile grew from the growing insanity before his irises momentarily flashed a hint of crimson. 6 years later, Wind Country, Sunagakure. A short red-headed 12-year-old boy walked slowly down the halls of the cage building, a large gourd hanging tightly on his back. His father wanted to see him. It must have been for the Chunin exams coming up, otherwise, the cage would want nothing to do with him today. The cage had a hard time getting along with his youngest son, but one couldn't say he hated him. It was his fault, after all, that his wife died and his son was what he was. The child's 2 older siblings were probably there already. His pace quickened, his white sash flowing through the air behind him and his maroon suit clinging to his small body. If it hadn't been for them and his sensei, Baki, he would have led a lonely life and become a threat to the very village his father wanted him to protect. And now he was right in front of his father's office, ready to go inside. Muffled voices could be heard, probably his family and Baki-sensei. He took a deep breath and knocked loud enough to cease the talking going on inside. There was a brief pause before someone spoke. "Come in." He did so, stepping in quietly before closing the wooden door behind him. The redhead looked up to see exactly who he had expected to be in here at the time. They all looked at him blankly as he blinked in return. "You wanted to see me, Kage-sama?" he asked monotonously. The addressed man hesitated slightly before answering, "Why, yes. Baki and I wanted to speak with you and your siblings about something before the Chunin exams start. Take a seat next to your brother." The boy nodded in acknowledgement before looking in the other two's direction. They smiled and waved momentarily. "Hey, Gaara." Nodding to them as well, said boy walked over and sat down next to his brother. The 3 then looked up at their elders patiently as the pair took deep breaths. They looked grave in a way, and Gaara wondered why. It all seemed very suspicious. That was when his sensei looked up. "As you know, the Chunin exams will be taking place in a month," he started as they looked on. "You must also know by now of our shortage of resources and shinobi around the village. Our culture is dying. Our people have little protection. We are a sitting target for the enemy villages and our reputation is starting to dwindle. Ever since our alliance with the Leaf Village, things are getting worse." The siblings listened with a trace of fear as what they heard processed in their minds. Of course, They already could see the weaknesses the Sand Village was starting to show, but they had never heard it in words. Suddenly, the Cage took up the explanation. What you don't know is the affiliation we now have with one of the newer hidden villages, a hidden village you most likely don't know of yet. It calls itself the Sound Village, and it dwells in the rice field country. The secret trade we've started with them is one of the reasons our resources are holding up. He explained grimly. They had offered this in return for an alliance, but they are enemies of the Leaf. They want our help to lead an assault on Konoha. What? The two older siblings yelped in unison as they stared at the two men. Attack the Leaf? Why would we attack them? They're our allies. Gaara said nothing while his eyes narrowed as his suspicions came true. So, they were hiding something. His father sighed heavily before looking at his children. Settle yourselves, Temari, Kankuro. You know our alliance with them has been causing nothing but poverty among the village. But that's only because of Sandaime, too. And forgive me for saying this, but he was the one fool enough to lower our defenses. This has nothing to do with Konohagakure. Temari pointed out desperately. I know, but now our defenses are too low, and if the Leaf suddenly turned on us, we would be too weak to defend ourselves. Besides, Otogakure is the only reason we have resources at the moment, so we need to give them aid in return, the Cage explained sorrowfully. 3. The three suppressed the urge to argue further as they knew the matter was settled. They were going to attack the Leaf Village, their strongest ally. There were so many things wrong with this situation, they didn't know where to begin. Finally, someone spoke that didn't usually speak, making nearly the entire room jump in surprise. This will be during the Chunin exams? Gaara asked suddenly as he looked up at his father. Baki was the first to answer him. Yes, it'll start in the middle of the third exam actually. What of the genin? He asked further, his eyes slightly narrowing. This time, Yondaime answered him. There will be no possible way for them to become Chunin this time around unless a Junin recommends them for the rank. Gaara merely nodded in acknowledgement although his eyes were still narrowed. His two older siblings ground their teeth in frustration from the village's decision while he returned to a blank expression. They reluctantly stood up and left when their father waved their dismissal. He also seemed reluctant about the result of the conference. Gaara led the way out with his arms crossed. The wrongness of this whole situation was just too much, but what could the three do? They had no say in the matter whatsoever, the Cage's children or not. It was time. Gaara, Temari and Kankuro were to go to the Hidden Leaf Village where the hidden villages were hosting the Chunin exams. The first exam began in 4 days, and this was their time to leave for it. It would take at least 3 days to get to Konoha. All three were in their rooms, packing for the 3-part test, and they couldn't help but wonder how they were going to overthrow the Leaf. It wouldn't be easy, that was certain. Gaara merely packed a few sets of clothing before zipping up his bag. He would have to carry it on one shoulder because of his gourd. Taking a deep breath, he left for his brother's room. Kankuro had just finished packing when he heard a brief knock at his door. He turned before hesitantly calling for the visitor to enter. The teenager was quite surprised to see his little brother on the other side. Gaara, he asked with a raised eyebrow as if he didn't trust his vision. The redhead merely nodded before walking inside and closing the door behind him. Ever since their uncle's death it was quite hard to get close to the younger boy, thus resulting in very awkward and unnerving conversations. Kankuro, the teal-eyed boy started almost melancholically. There's something wrong with father's decision. PSH, yeah, tell me about it, the other boy answered with a sigh, but I guess he can't have all the blame. I mean, he probably spoke with the elders about it too before telling us. Yes, Gaara agreed slowly before continuing, he wishes to use me as the main weapon in the assault. What? Kankuro asked in bewilderment as he stared at his brother. The younger boy closed his eyes before going on. The day after the conference, he called me to his office again. He had told me that the only way the attack would be successful would be if Shukaku were to aid us. But, But that's too dangerous. Surely Dad wouldn't go that far too. If it serves my purpose, then I'm all right with it, the redhead interrupted as his dark eyes remained closed. The puppeteer looked at the boy with disbelief. Gaara would have to let that monster out during the third exam, and he was okay with it. Of course, the redhead was never one to complain about anything really. Still, this was crazy. Letting the monster out wouldn't only hurt everyone and prove difficult to stop, but it would also hurt Gaara himself, and as a brother, this was going to be a huge problem for the brunette. Ototo, Kankuro started, using the one word he only called his sibling when he was dead serious. We've already been through this. Your purpose is to live so that us people have a chance to know you. You don't know how precious you are to Tamari and me. The statement made Gaara's heart clench ever so slightly. The word, precious, was a very sensitive thing when said around him, and saying that he was precious to someone made it all the more susceptible. He winced at the reflex in his chest but showed nothing else. Yes, but your concern isn't what I'm looking to receive anymore. Father, huh? Kankuro asked as he leaned against his bed with his arms folded. Hesitantly, Gaara nodded. He had been seeking the cage's consent ever since he had recovered as much as he could from his uncle's death. It had been quite difficult seeing as Gaara himself was the one who had basically killed his uncle, Yoshimaru. It had all been caused when the cage panicked briefly about the danger his son was growing to be and absent-mindedly directed his deceased wife's brother to assassinate him. The hate in Yoshimaru's heart toward the boy drove him to accept without hesitation, although he had acted like Gaara's second father for his entire 6-year-old life. When the attempt at murder failed and the redhead shattered the man's body with the sand he wielded, Yoshimaru killed himself with explosive notes, hoping to take Gaara with him, but failed once again. The assault had nearly devastated the small boy's sanity altogether if it weren't for his siblings. Gaara stood and thought in silence for a moment before spontaneously asking, "Why don't we ever call him Chi-Chi?" The name that was the most endearing thing a child could call their father processed through the older boy's mind before he shrugged nonchalantly. "I don't know, maybe it's because he's the cage, and I guess calling him that would almost be a form of weakness and disrespect in his honor." "HN," was all that escaped the other's lips before he opened his eyes again. Kankuro stared back at his brother with a mirrored blank expression. The puppet master was the one person he was closest to, and probably the only one he could have sociable conversations with. He averted his teal eyes after a few wearisome seconds. "Weakness," he repeated finally, his throat curling in disgust of the word. Despite the sand shield that kept him physically analgesic, he knew he was obviously weak. His conscience was weak, his mentality was frail, and his soul, his spirit, was pathetic. He must be the living embodiment of embarrassment for his father. "If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, Gaara," Kankuro trailed off for a moment or two before letting his frustration show through with a growl, "Damn it. You're not weak. This is getting more and more ridiculous. Just because Dad doesn't have the best of relationships with you, doesn't mean you embarrass him." Gaara's expression remained blank, but his frustration began to rise. "How would you know that, Kankuro? You have no idea, do you? You're not even sure yourself about what you just said, are you?" "Yes, I am. If anything, you're one of the strongest people I have ever known," the brunette confessed quietly. His sibling stared blankly, clearly taken aback from the sudden statement. It was so sincere and gentle, it was almost disturbingly nerve-wracking. The older of the two looked away uncomfortably before continuing, "But you don't know it. Hell, I can't blame you though." "Why? Why would you say that?" his little brother asked suddenly. It was a moment or two before the other replied, finally looking up into the other's eyes, because you've been through so much torture, and hate, and pain, and I can't even begin to think of any possible way that you could have gotten through it all without breaking. Not many people could survive a cruel world like ours being seen the way most people see you, but you did. Ototo, nothing about you is weak." The redhead was still slightly taken aback after this explanation. A tension quickly went up between the two brothers for a long while. Gaara could only stare. Was this really how his brother saw him? As one of the strongest people he knew. Finally, he regained his calm composure before turning swiftly to head out the door. Kankuro sighed from the result of the conversation, still a bit frustrated about Gaara's self-consciousness, but turned to walk toward his private bathroom nonetheless, knowing full well that their socializing had quickly come to an end. It was the sudden words that rapidly graced his ears that made him jump and look over his shoulder. "Thank you." And with that, the door closed shut. 1 month earlier, Fire Country, Konoha. A white-haired Junin walked across the room, his nose and mouth kept hidden under a navy mask. The one eye, revealed in contrast to the other features of his face, looked quite bored. So, this was the Jinchuriki's apartment. It almost looked like no one had lived here for years. All the furniture was buried in half-inch thick dust. He was a 12-year-old boy. Wouldn't he have gotten that one instinct that 12-year-old boys get that literally commanded them to trash anything that looked neat in the slightest? A smirk nearly spread across the man's cloth-covered face. The third Hokage stood behind him in silence, clearly thinking about something important. His eyes followed the other blindly as he observed the ostensibly empty apartment living room. The man seemed to be very interested in the dust factor of the area. So, this is the apartment that the elders let him have. He must be bored out of his mind, the younger ninja commented with a slight smile in his eye, but really, doesn't the cleanliness strike you as odd? The Hokage nearly smirked. Yes, the living room and kitchen may look clean, but all the food is spoiled rotten. If you opened the fridge at this very moment, you'd probably die from the fumes that would explode in your face. I see, was all the other said before the older of the two continued with closed eyes. The cleanliness mainly is the effect of not spending really any time in these two rooms at all. Meaning, the Junin trailed off with his visible eyebrow raised. The other's eyes remained shut, meaning that you should take a look at his bedroom. The man appeared to raise an eyebrow at the sudden suggestion. He had to admit, the sudden neat appearance of the boy's home was shocking, but what made the bedroom so special amongst the rooms? He got his answer when the older man opened the door that led to the sleeping area and he followed him inside. The entire room was a mess of chaos and debris. Rubble lied where dressers and stands should have been. A large mirror was in shards on the torn and slashed-out carpet. The doors of the closet were ripped savagely off their hinges and the half of one door was in splinters. And the bed, oh Lord, the bed, it looked as if an abnormally large beast had had a nightmare under the covers. Teeny feathers that were once pillows were actually neatly piled in the middle of the broken mattress. The man looked around the shredded area with a look of slight shock and slight remorse. It was a moment or two before he finally said something. He has a lot of hate, doesn't he, Hokage-sama? Yes, almost too much, but who are we to blame him? No matter where a human sacrifice grows up, they are all treated the same. That's just how cruel us people are, the leader of the Leaf Village pointed out drastically. True, the other answered slowly as he further observed the room, and I'm guessing this is why you chose me. Because you think I can handle it. I originally had two choices. To be brutally honest, exclaimed the Cage with a small smile, it was between you and the only other Anbu member and ninja of Konoha that could handle the job successfully. So then I thought, Tenzo, a current Anbu Black Ops, or Hitaki Kakashi, a former Anbu Black Ops. I see where Asuma gets his decision-making from, the one assumedly named Kakashi replied with a sigh. The older man laughed at this before going silent again. After a couple more minutes of allowing the Hitaki to look around, they left the boy's apartment in silence. Now, it was time to face the one small boy that had kept the village in fear for 12 years. A black-haired, 12-year-old boy snuck quick glances at the whiskered student sitting a seat away. They had never really talked before, but the student had seen what the blonde could do, and he hated to admit it, but it horrified him. He was a monster. His eyes would flash crimson every time that certain thrill would take him over. His canines would lengthen and his hair would become more savage and unruly than it was. Yes, The boy had witnessed this walking home one rainy day when he was 8. The blonde child had a grown man by the neck pressed firmly against a brick wall. The sight had the black-eyed boy frozen to his spot on the sidewalk. The guy that fell victim to him was missing an ear. Something dark drizzled down his chin and his neck was bleeding hectically from where the boy had him around the throat. His left upper arm was broken in such a way that the ends of where it was broken stabbed through the surface of his skin. To complete the pain was the overwhelmingly bruised skin and the deep cut that loomed over his left eye. The one torturing him had an insane grin plastered to his face. After that, the other boy didn't witness the scene any further as he had taken off in the other direction as fast as his legs would allow. And now, he was separated from this hot-blooded killer by one young, pink-haired kunoichi in training that seemed terrified of her position next to the blonde. His thoughts were quickly cut off when their sensei called his name for the team he was being assigned to. He jumped in surprise before staring around wide-eyed at the brown-haired man. 4. Excuse me, Uruka-sensei. I didn't catch what group I was in. Could you repeat that? He requested suddenly. This earned him a slightly confused glare from his teacher. That doesn't seem like you, Sasuke. You don't usually drift off like that. Something troubling you? No, I'm fine. I kind of just dazed off for a moment, the student defended lightly. Well, alright then, Uchiha Sasuke, you're in Group 7 with Haruno Sakura and Uzumaki Naruto, Uruka repeated somewhat regretfully. It took a moment for the names to process in Sasuke's mind. The name of the monstrous boy took the longest to understand. Uzumaki Naruto, the boy that had murdered so many people in his young life, was going to be his teammate. He snuck a quick glance at the two teammates who just so happened to sit directly to his right. The pink-haired girl was Sakura, who had, like every other girl in the academy, swooned over him and his personality in such a way that it really grated on his nerves. But that didn't matter now. He looked past her to the fox-like student that had somehow successfully killed many without detection. The boy seemed unfazed and indifferent in response to the assigning as he leaned back coolly in his chair and held his arms folded behind his spiky head. What he wore only seemed to reflect his character. A black t-shirt under a dark orange leather vest hugged his torso while long ribbons of white cloth wrapped around his forearms. Ebony pants that exposed half of his shin and long, black toe shoes completed the outfit. 5. He had a hauntingly blank expression and a nonchalant composure. He essentially looked kind of bored. His lids were drooped so low, it actually seemed as if he were asleep. Sasuke wished he hadn't noticed, but Naruto was unusually quiet today. Usually, he would add snide remarks and sarcastic insults anywhere he saw fit, especially when they could offend Iruka himself, but today, he hadn't said a word at all. This actually scared the Uchiha. When someone wasn't himself, no good would come of it. Slowly, Iruka's words seemed to finally process in his mind, and each three-man team will wait here together for their new Junin sensei. They will be the leader and commander of the group and you must follow their orders if you want to become respected shinobi yourselves. But until they come, why don't you take some time to get to know your new fellow comrades? It's more than likely you'll be a good team if you're good friends as well. Good friends? With Naruto? That was a good one. Why not slit his throat and toss him face first into Hyuga Hiyashi while the man blew up over the blood suddenly on his shirt? Hey, Sasuke would rather that than try to get to know Naruto. But when he looked over, he saw that the blonde was making no such attempt. Instead, he seemed to be gazing intently into the abyss with half-lidded blue eyes while Sakura subconsciously scooted closer to the Uchiha. What surprised him further was that he wasn't bothered by it. Hey Sasuke-kun, she greeted quietly as quick sea-green glances were shot at the boy to her right. I guess we're teammates now. He didn't answer. It seemed she was more flustered from her fear of Naruto than she was being close to her crush. She wasn't even blushing, but this Sasuke understood. Naruto could kill both of them without a second thought, no matter how skilled the boy was. Would you, like to get something to eat while we wait? She inquired suddenly, her full attention on him this time. Before he could answer, Naruto suddenly stood up without so much as a warning. He had shot up so quickly, nimbly and quietly, it didn't even look as if he were sitting in the first place. And before anyone could say or do anything else, he was out the door of the classroom to God knows where. Sakura must have witnessed what the blonde could do as well since she was trembling by then. Sasuke honestly wanted to reach out and calm her with a gentle grip, but thought better of it. Instead, he attempted to soothe her with a more subtle method. Sakura, don't be afraid of Naruto. He can't do anything under the watch of our Junin captain. At least, I hope he can't, was the thought that immediately came to mind. Nonetheless, she smiled graciously up at him and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear while a red tint heated her cheeks. Great, since there was nothing else there to keep her attention anymore, she would move into her fairytale phase and swoon over him once again. Sure enough, she was squealing inside from the fact that he actually cared. Thank you, Sasuke. That gave me the relief I needed, she pointed out shyly. Wait, shyly, it looked like she was still recovering from the blonde's presence. Good, it meant less irritation coming his way. So, this was his group. Kakashi looked from the small emerald-eyed girl to the pale, black-haired boy and then finally to the darkly clothed blonde. He looked bored out of his mind, but they both knew he was contemplating about something. As he was usually to all meetings and scheduled conferences, Kakashi Hatake was late to pick up his team from the academy. They were the last 3 inside the school, and he was almost sorry he hadn't gotten there sooner. The other 2 kids were probably terrified of being left alone with the golden-haired boy. He finally looked up from his place on the fence and tried to look friendly. So, why don't we start by introducing ourselves? This way, we'll have better communication and such with one another. This earned a snort from Naruto's direction. The Junin ignored it effortlessly and looked to Sakura. Why don't we start with you, miss? Oh, my name's Haruno Sakura, she greeted hurriedly as her attention was focused on the blonde on the other side of Sasuke just a few seconds before. I can see why, thought Kakashi as his eye quickly swept her hair, 6 before turning to the next student. How about you, you are? He didn't answer for a moment or two. His black eyes were blank, and he was glaring at nothing in particular, but Kakashi, being the patient man that he was, waited along with him until finally, the young boy answered, Uchiha Sasuke. Kakashi's one visible eye nearly widened. So this was one of the only 2 survivors from the slaughter of the Uchiha clan. This was the younger brother of Uchiha Itachi, one of the most dangerous S-ranked criminals in the bingo book. This boy's life must have been devastated after that. It took the Junin a moment or 2 before continuing the introduction. I see, he replied blankly before landing his single gaze on the blonde to his right, and I'm certain that everyone here knows of you, Uzumaki Naruto. There was mockingly weary sigh before said boy drawled out, yes, I guess so, Kakashi-senpai. The man was actually slightly taken aback by the sudden response. He paused ever so slightly before replying, so, you know of me as well. How well? Hatake Kakashi, son of Hatake Tsukumo, also known as Konoha's White Fang, and once a student under the 4th Hokage. You're currently a 27-year-old Junin master who was formerly an Anbu Black Ops commander. You graduated the academy at age 5 and passed the Chunin exams at age 6. You utilize over 1,000 jutsu in gift of the Sharingan I you inherited from your old teammate, Uchiha Obito, and it has earned you the nickname, Copy Ninja Kakashi. You're chronically late for most meetings, which mostly results from spending much time at the grave marker by the training field. Your birth date is September 15th and you have an O blood type. You have accelerated success in ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu and dujutsu, and your ceiling knowledge is at its peak. Naruto explained effortlessly before leaning back with a yawn. Kakashi could have sworn he felt his eyebrow twitch dangerously after the explanation. How in the blue hell did he There was no possible way a 12-year-old graduate could have figured that out all on his own, but then again, Naruto wasn't an ordinary boy. Much of that stuff was unknown to the people who were actually closest to him, and yet, this young ninja could explain it without so much as a second thought. The other two stared in perplexity from the sudden knowledge, but remained quiet. It took a couple seconds of shock before the teacher gathered himself enough to respond. "Well, if I didn't know better, I'd say you were stalking me," he pointed out rather calmly, "but seeing as there was no way you could know that much from mere pursuit, I'd say you've done some research. I tend to want to know about who'll be trampling into my life, Kakashi-senpai," the student stated simply, but his eyes slightly narrowed into bluish slits. "Well done, but from now on, call me Kakashi-sensei. I am your new teacher after all," Kakashi passively answered while his arms crossed over his chest. "Strictly speaking, Kakashi-senpai, you're the new team leader," the blonde corrected in a state of boredom. "Smart," immediately ran through Sasuke's mind as he slightly glared over at his new teammate. But the former Anbu member retained his composure. "Yes, I guess so, huh? But I'm curious, does calling me senpai make you feel older or something?" Quote, quote. This time the narrowing of the younger boy's eyes was all too obvious. He didn't say anything, but another statement seemed to exist through his eyes: "Watch it." The other challenged him, "Or what?" Naruto's eyes flashed dangerously. "Or you're going to beg for death before the end." Kakashi's eyes actually hinted a bit of amusement. That sounds a little cliché. "You in what army? You'd just love to die, wouldn't you?" Naruto almost growled. There was a quick shrug. "Nah, 27's a bit young." There was a further narrowing of crystalline eyes. "It doesn't matter when you look 30 years older than you are. Now, if you're referring to the gray hair," Kakashi actually glared this time. And meanwhile, the other two looked between sensei and student as the staring match kept on. 7. It wasn't long until Sasuke got a little impatient. "What are you two doing?" he asked irritably. This caught their attention almost immediately. Naruto regained his usual bored expression before leaning back again, paying the student no mind as Kakashi glanced at him curiously. It was another moment or two before someone spoke. "My apologies, Sasuke, Sakura, I must have dazed off for the moment. What I really want to talk to you guys about would be the test in which I'll figure if you all are good enough to be shinobi," he started plainly as he pretended to dust his vest off. While he said this, a swift statement came to mind, really to find out more of Naruto's combative nature. He glanced again at the murderer who seemed like he wanted to be anywhere but there at the moment. If one just took a 2-second glance at the boy, they'd probably think he was just another ordinary kid dying of boredom, that is, until they would look into his eyes. One feature completely gave his character away. The dim gleam was enough to explain it all. He had no dreams. He had no drive. His crystalline eyes were dark, dull and dead, at least, until they flashed a scarlet full of excitement and bloodlust. It was then, and only then, that one would know he was really, truly alive. 29 days earlier. Fire Country, Konoha. Sasuke growled from his current position in the solid ground up to his neck. This guy was making a fool out of him. He glared up at the Junin kneeling by his seemingly severed head. Kakashi gave him a smiling eye before commenting intelligently on the situation. Now, Sasuke, don't get too upset. You should know that the ground is far more interesting, up close." Oh, how the Uchiha wanted to bite his face off at that moment. He was messing with him and Sakura. She had probably been caught in some kind of obvious trap by now, like he had just so foolishly done. He growled loudly again at how the grown man was mocking him with his one visible facial feature. But, said grown man had something else entirely on his mind at the moment as he stood up to take a good look around the training field. Now, where is he? He thought dubiously, keeping his expression calm. He hadn't seen the boy ever since the start of the session in which the three had to acquire the 2 bells from him. He looked in all directions as Sasuke struggled at his feet. Where's Naruto? Figuring that he wouldn't spot the blonde from where he stood, he left the student in his state without much concern. Sakura was probably still passed out from the vision she had seen of a bloody and beaten Sasuke, courtesy of their new leader. He read a few more lines of his favorite book series, Ika Ika, before slowly putting that away in his back pocket. It took a couple minutes of jumping and walking around, but he finally spotted the Jinchuriki lying comfortably at the foot of a large tree with his hands folded behind his head. Kakashi sat on the branch above in a frog-like stance before he heard the blonde's voice. "Don't hover over me and don't stare at me," he ordered coldly, although he didn't open his eyes. Kakashi blinked a couple times before dropping down onto the ground beside the boy and coolly leaning against the trunk. "Does my presence bother you?" "Yes, Kakashi-senpai, it does," the boy answered nonchalantly. "So, how is this layout treating you, Kahai? Are you relaxed?" the sensei inquired lazily as he stared down the boy. He put a slight amount of emphasis on the response to "senpai," that was, Kahai, knowing that this would piss the boy off since it would make him feel like the man was stating he was inferior. And indeed, this caused the student to open an eye to glare slightly up at his team leader. He thought about roughly telling the man not to call him that or just plain killing him then and there altogether, but thought better of it since he felt lazy and the shinobi would probably retort with something like, "Don't call me, senpai." Nevertheless, Naruto had no intention to argue with a man he barely even cared about, quite. Kakashi admired his indifferent nature. It's what he himself showed anytime he just plain wanted to. "You know that if you fail to get these bells from me, you'll have to be sent back to the academy that you find so irritating," he pointed out dryly. This actually caught the boy's attention before he looked up at the Junin. "Is that so? Will those two get in my way?" "No, I'm pretty sure they're quite occupied at the moment." Was the only noise Naruto made to show that he understood before standing up slowly. Kakashi actually took a few steps back, knowing full well what the boy was capable of. Naruto rubbed his neck as if there were some sort of pain in the vertebral bone before lolling it back in an attempt to release any stress he may have had. Finally, he shot a piercing azure look in the ninja's direction before giving him a small knowing smile. "Kakashi-senpai, at the beginning of this insignificant exercise, you told me that the only way I'd get those stupid bells from you would be only if I tried with a killing instinct, right?" he asked astutely, not caring to acknowledge his teammate's existence. The Hatake immediately regretted ever giving those types of directions to a cold-blooded killer like Naruto. All around the village, people had been disappearing, and a good number of them were Junin, some of them particularly skilled. It was no doubt that the losses were somehow linked to Naruto. After a moment, he reluctantly nodded, his gray eyes no longer holding any amusement. The Uzumaki's smile grew rather too sadistically. He was probably feeling triumphant that he would be able to subtly get back at the man. "Well, that may have been your biggest mistake yet, senpai," he pointed out with a certain bone-chilling thrill to his voice. As he finished the sentence, Kakashi could hear the cracking of the boy's hands as they changed at his sides. Their structure grew longer and bonier after a few more sickening cracks, and his nails grew dangerously sharper. The white-haired Junin witnessed the canines sharpen evidently in his grin, and his unruly hair took on a more savage appearance. The fact that he could call upon this demon instinct on his own was impressive enough, but what really caught the Sharingan user's eye was the sudden feeling that sprung to life in the blonde's eyes. Before, they had no sign of the living whatsoever, and the sudden change had nearly scared the man. He backed up a couple more feet before reaching in his pack and taking out a kunai. No way was he going to block this kid's attacks with merely his arms. "So, sensei, are you ready?" the blonde growled with his expression looking more and more insane each passing moment. Kakashi kept a strong expression as he took a defensive stance with his weapon. "Come at me with all you've got, Kahai." Naruto's expression relaxed a little before obliging. The ninja was shocked to say the least. The kid could move faster than he thought. He could barely see him, but he refused to use his Sharingan eye, not for something like this. He dodged most every swipe that came down. Some were dangerously close to making contact. Others, he had to block with his blade carefully. The Biju carrier was a blur of black, orange and gold. Finally, one stroke caught him in the side. His eye widened slightly from the 2 slashes that drizzled blood out without hesitation. The Uzumaki smirked slightly at this, but didn't allow his sensei any time to recover. He kicked him up into the air in his next move, although the man blocked any damage with his arms. But the thing was, in the air, he was totally at the boy's mercy. Sure enough, the 12-year-old swung a punch at his masked face, but Kakashi fortunately evaded the blow by using substitution. Instead, the student's fist broke a very thick log into splinters. He hissed slightly from being tricked before turning to where the Junin had popped up behind him. Instead of taking time to take in the reappearance, Naruto reacted quicker than Kakashi had ever seen from most ninja he had known. He whipped a harsh kick around, and this time, the assault connected. It made contact with Kakashi's shoulder, and he could have sworn he heard a deafening crack. His shoulder blade had probably fractured from the impact of the attack before he hit the ground. Yet again, Naruto wasted no time, but Kakashi showed him that he wasn't the only ninja who was quick to react. As the blonde's next punch hit the suddenly vacant ground, Kakashi kicked him in the side after escaping the pain of another strike. Naruto skidded on the ground as he was forced away, but immediately regained his offensive stance. He was still smirking even though he had just made a mistake. The Hatake didn't let this surprise him while he mirrored the boy. Immediately, they were thrown in the air in a series of blows and dodges as Naruto disappeared and reappeared in every direction possible. His speed was beyond amazing to the human eye. The Sharingan wielder could barely keep up with his movements since he refused to use his Dujutsu. Naruto threw another powerful punch to add to the volley, and this time, Kakashi chose to deflect it with the metallic guard on his glove, which unfortunately came with an immediate consequence. Both were thrown back from the force of the clash, and the white-haired ninja instantly felt a few bones in his hand rupture. When both regained firm stances on the ground, he looked down at his glove only to widen his eyes in shock. The plate that had been on it was shattered, and some of the shards had fallen off already. He breathed heavily from the session before looking up at the boy who stood and looked as if he hadn't even broken a sweat. He eyed the murderer wearily. Excellent. I can't help but feel a bit curious, though, in all that, you never once made an effort to steal the prize from me. You mean that stupid bell? I took that a while ago, while you fell from that kick to the shoulder, the Uzumaki pointed out impassively before standing up a bit straighter. Kakashi's eyes widened momentarily before he looked down at his belt. Sure enough, one of the 2 bells was missing, and as he looked up, Naruto dangled the prize by his golden head with a lazy smile. His hand and teeth had already gone back to normal, and Kakashi couldn't help but smile slightly in relief and satisfaction. I'll say that I was impressed, the blonde stated suddenly as he placed the bell indifferently in his vest pocket. No one I've met could keep up with my movements as nimbly as you did without Sharingan or something. Even though I have to say, I was holding back. As am I of you, the son of the White Fang answered after widening his eyes slightly from this piece of information. You're the first student who could steal a bell from me. Ahem, I must admit that I was occupied with the force of your punches. The other's smile faded as he began walking to where the exercise had started. Kakashi hesitantly followed the genin to the 3 stumps before pointing at the food to the left. There's the food I promised, feel free to dig in. Naruto shot the objects a long, hard look before turning his head away and continuing to walk to the mini pillars. I'm not hungry. Instead, the 12-year-old lied down comfortably at the foot of the middle pillar in boredom. He watched the Junin under lazy lids. Meanwhile, Kakashi looked around to see where the other 2 teammates had snuck off. It wasn't long until Naruto witnessed an aerial attack on the sensei. Fire style. Fireball. 3. Kakashi snapped his head up to see Sasuke blowing a large flame in his direction from above. Naruto watched impassively, knowing full well that the other two had no chance of getting the other bell from him even though he was fractured in a couple places. They were just simply no match for him. Then, Kakashi would fail them and they would be sent back to the academy, not like the blonde cared or anything. Minutes of fighting passed by as Sakura fell back uselessly and Sasuke was pinned many times on the ground. It wasn't long until their leader let up a bit and let the two eat since he told them not to eat breakfast that morning. Besides, the bones that were cracked thanks to the young killer were starting to get to him. The team was supposed to retrieve the bells from him before sundown, and so far, Naruto was the only one that had succeeded. It was very close to that deadline, and Sasuke couldn't help but feel frustrated. When they had finished and Kakashi had returned from wherever the heck he went, Sasuke stood up quickly, ready to finish what had started. He needed this if he was ever to avenge his clan. The punches were thrown before the man could really even make his way over. He blocked them quickly before the Uchiha growled. This went on for about another 10 minutes or so as Sakura joined in the onslaught as well, although mainly acting as a decoy for Sasuke without meaning to. Kakashi held both off in a flurry of quick movements as Naruto watched in boredom. It wasn't long until frustration got to the fighting student. "There's no way in hell that I'm giving up," he yelled furiously as yet another hit was blocked by the Junin. Kakashi smiled under his mask, "And that is why I'm letting you pass." This made the boy cease his movements so quickly, that he fell back to the ground and dropped his battle stance. "What?" The man looked down at the student with a smiling eye as Sakura stared in surprise from the other side of the ninja. "I learned something from an old friend a long time ago. The greatest ninja isn't the one that knows the most techniques or has the most skills. No, the greatest ninja is the one shinobi that has the guts to never give up. All of you have shown me that, and it's why you all passed the test." Sakura stared at the man from her position incredulously as Naruto sighed in annoyance before looking at the darkening sky. He realized that all three of them passing was actually in his benefit. With the entire team, in 1 month, they could take the Chunin exams. One couldn't start without the entire team with him, and becoming a Chunin would give the genin more freedom. He thought it over for a long while as Kakashi talked with Sasuke and Sakura. "In which I should say congratulations. You three are the first. Present time, River Country, near Katabami Kinzan, 4-5. Gaara let his gourd and pack drop indifferently as he watched his team make camp on the rocky hill. Baki started the fire as Temari and Kankuro laid out their sleeping bags. He didn't bother. He didn't sleep. Why should he try to relax? He turned to his sensei after a moment. "Baki-sensei?" he asked slowly. "I'll keep lookout," the redhead answered monotonously. His leader seemed to take a good, hard look at him for the next moment before shrugging and returning to the fire. "All right, I see no problem in it. Just promise me you won't push yourself too hard." "How can I push myself? I don't feel exhaustion from wakefulness the way you do," the student pointed out with a little bit of confusion. Baki tensed a bit before looking at the genin once more. "Sorry, that didn't come out the way I wanted it to." "It's all right. I have no problem with it. I could use the time to think anyway," the other answered with a slight shrug before sitting down and leaning back on his gourd. His leader nodded briefly before feeding the fire a bit. His siblings made themselves comfortable on their cushions before gazing at the fire. Kankuro had taken off his eared hood and set it aside while Temari propped her head up over the elbow that rested on her fan. They were discussing something in a low tone so they were difficult to distinguish from Gaara's position, but he could tell by their expressions that it was about something serious. It was probably about the plan of the betrayal. Gaara agreed with them without question. He knew that this would not only make them lose one of their strongest allies of defense, but it would also label them as traitors and they would become untrustworthy to other villages as well. He crossed his arms and thought deeply about the situation. They were 1 day away from getting to the Leaf Village, and the redhead couldn't help but feel a bit reluctant to go. He did not want to take any part in the scheme, but the encouragement of his father led him to do so. The Chunin exams would not be too hard to get through, seeing as they were the 3 most skilled genin of their village. And though he had never told anyone but Tamari, in which that was an accident anyway, he had a drive to succeed his father in becoming the Kazekage. The title would earn him the trust and respect of most all the village, and that is what he had sought the most throughout his life. Becoming a Chunin would bring him one step closer to his goal, thus, easing his reluctance. And even though he was informed that no one would become a Chunin this time around, many of the Junin in their village showed approval on their group, so it was more than likely that quite a few would recommend them for rank. Gaara watched and waited as these thoughts rolled through his mind. He had no idea what Konoha was like, he knew nothing about it except the fact that it was in the Fire Country and that they were allies. He wondered what the genin of their village were like. He had always known they had powerful ninja, but just how powerful? He soon drifted quickly into his thoughts while watching the fire before him dance. Tamari snuck a quick glance at him along with her sibling a couple yards away. Both bit their lips stressfully. Yeah, Kankuro nodded quickly before they looked back at one another. Baki-sensei told me before we left. He's another one. I heard there have been disappearances around Konoha for the past couple years, and several of them were Junin. A lot of people think it's related to him, his sister answered with a slight shudder. You know his name? The boy asked dubiously. She shook her head. No, just heard about him. Should we tell Gaara? The puppeteer hesitantly started. Tamari seemed to take some time to think it over for the moment as she looked at the redhead again before shaking her head once more. No, it's better he finds out on his own. He's already reluctant enough to go now, I don't want to pressure him more. Right, he agreed shortly while following her gaze. Gaara seemed to be deep in thought. The two siblings wondered about what his thoughts were, but soon shrugged them off before drifting off to sleep. Their sensei sat and watched the fire intently as if the sight were one he hadn't seen before. A moment or two passed before the genin stood and made his way to the cliff hovering above the group. It was the perfect lookout site for him to watch over the others. The young ninja trekked to the top of it before sitting down and having his teal eyes scout the paths all around their camp. And for the first time that day, he sighed heavily. This would be his last calm night before his life would officially turn into chaos. Present time, Fire Country, Konohagakure. The blonde's eyes flashed scarlet as he stared blankly at the young woman he was effortlessly pinning down. She was sobbing profusely while her eyes shined up at him in fear. He was holding her down with a foot to her stomach while pulling her into the barrier with her wrist in his vice grip. His inhumane nails stabbed into her pale skin, causing her to shake violently in pain. Her shoulder was already bleeding liberally from where he clawed and her leg was actually shattered from where he smashed her against a wall. It was always at night when this urge to murder was at its peak. The Jinchuriki gave no attention to if it were a man, woman or even a child. He merely knew that he had to kill something, and at the same time torturing it as much as possible. The boy stared at his victim without pity. In an act of desperation, she whispered, "Please, you don't have to do this." His eyes narrowed dangerously before shifting his grip on her wrist in one swift motion. The deafening crack of her bone told him enough that he had broken it without much effort. She bit her lip harshly in reaction to the pain that came, but kept her silence as more tears slid down her face. "Don't you dare try and tell me what the hell to do," Naruto spat before smirking slightly. "So, how do you feel? Being looked down upon with nothing but hate?" The woman stiffened a bit before looking at him again. Her lip had begun to bleed, but she ignored it. He growled at her hesitation before pressing harshly on her stomach with his foot. Her breath hitched from the action as she closed her eyes in pain before looking up again. Slowly but steadily, her mouth soon curved into a sad smile. "I feel regret," she started with a tearful motherly grin. "I regret that I was one of the ones who turned you into this." "Why isn't this surprising?" he replied loathingly as he stretched her arm a bit further. Her eyes wavered a bit, but her smile didn't falter before she continued to whisper, "And I feel angry that no one tried to save you." Naruto's eyes nearly widened, but he kept his composure steady. He didn't say anything as he stared at the woman's heart-warming smile. Finally, she closed her eyes and her smile turned into a benevolent grin. The boy could only stare. "I'm sorry, Naruto," she apologized quietly. The blue-eyed boy's heart skipped a beat before thumping forcefully into his chest. No, this wasn't right. He was feeling something he had no knowledge of. Was it fear? The only fear he had ever felt in this life was to have a meaningless existence, but what was this fear? It confused him. His mind was reeling, and his head stung. He ground his teeth harshly in reaction, and soon glared at the woman in hate, and finally, his eyes took on the full shade of garnet. "Don't fucking mess with me," he snarled suddenly, but the arm that gripped her began shaking violently without his notice. Her smile widened slightly at the achievement of stretching out to him before she closed her damp lids once more. So, the chance of saving him was still in reach. Now, in her mind, she wished her family and Konoha well. But most of all, her dying wish was for somebody, anybody, to take that one chance, that one risk, and save this poor confused boy from destroying himself completely. Not a moment after the wish was stated clearly in her mind, Naruto grinned sadistically before thrusting his free hand into her chest. She gasped shallowly as the appendage broke through her rib cage, pierced her lungs, and successfully grasped around her heart, but her smile still did not fade. Naruto did not hesitate. He crushed his grip around the faintly beating organ, and the woman finally let out a silent scream as her life source exploded within her own chest. Still, the soft grin stayed, and Naruto stared at this feature for a long while after the woman died. He slowly pulled his crimson hand out of the warm body, but that one effect mesmerized him, and it was driving him insane. Slowly, his features turned into an expression full of disgust before he tilted his head back and screamed at the heavens. His heart was hurting, and he didn't know why. A young boy of 8 flattened himself against the wooden fence in panic, hoping to keep in the shadows. He quickly pulled his 2 classmates with him without so much as a warning, nearly causing the pair to yelp in surprise before he slapped his hands over their mouths. He looked around the corner once more before sighing in relief and letting his hands drop. His female comrade growled impatiently from his lack of warning with her hands on her hips. "Konohamaru-kun, at least warn us next time you choose to flatten Udon and me against a wall," she huffed irritably. Said boy sighed a bit once more, not letting his eyes slip from that spot around the corner. "Sorry, guys, but I couldn't help it, Moegi." He was around the corner. This actually caused the small girl to draw out a gasp while her hands immediately flew up to cover her mouth in shock. Her eyes spread wide simultaneously with the movement. Him. The fox. Yeah, Konohamaru answered, finally turning to look at his 2 friends. The boy named Udon sniffled evidently before pushing his abnormally large glasses further up the bridge of his nose, but what would he be doing around the academy again? "I heard he hated this place." The other 2 looked at him for a long time, mulling over the question in their minds carefully before Moegi suddenly piped up, "Aren't the Chunin exams about to start?" "Oh yeah, Genin's nominated to take it get their applications today. Even those from neighboring villages take it," Konohamaru exclaimed in excitement. "Konoha's hosting it this year." Both turned to look at Udon once more from the small disruption. He looked back blankly as if what he were about to say was obvious. That still doesn't explain why he would be around here. Genins in the hosting village don't get their applications until noon. That's what Iruka-sensei told me. Moegi and the other boy looked up toward the sky and blinked hesitantly before the girl finally queried, "Well, what time is it then?" "I don't know, but that fox has to be here for it." "There's no other explanation," Konohamaru pointed out once more before looking around the fence corner again. "You know it's rude to talk about someone and act as if they're not listening." All three academy students froze in place when the statement reached their ears. That voice was known all too well around the village, and it struck fear into even the strongest Junin. And it had sounded directly above them. Terrified, the trio brought up enough strength to look up at the branch looming over them. Someone whiskered and Blonde looked back without the slightest expression. A small whimper was drawn from Moegi as all of the children stepped back in fright. In their minds, death was but one wrong move away. Konohamaru was the first to stutter. Sorry, Naruto-san. We were just. You're pathetic, the genin stated briskly before flipping off the branch and landing in front of the students, causing them to take a few more steps back. I've seen you before, you're the Hokage's grandson, am I right? PFF'd. Some air. The boy took the blow to his pride head on and without regret. He'd rather be insulted and live to see tomorrow than stand up for himself and not live to see the following second. Their mentor, Ebisu-sensei, had always advised them to stay as far away from Naruto as possible, and now they had most likely just pissed him off. Konohamaru could barely even respond while his friends shook helplessly behind him. You're right. Of course. You're always right, and we are truly sorry for talking about you, but you're annoying. Naruto bit out suddenly, immediately causing Konohamaru's rambling to cease. He looked at each one of them with slightly narrowed eyes before taking one of the hands that had been shoved indifferently into his pockets and looking at it with vague interest. You know what I do to the idiots that annoy me? Hopefully nothing bad, Udon murmured quietly behind their leader. The others glanced at him before looking back at the boy in fear. Hope is weak, the older boy pointed out before lowering his hand. You should have abandoned it when that insignificant brat opened his mouth. He took a step toward them, causing Moegi to start crying silently behind the two boys. Konohamaru and Udon looked as though they were ready to run at any given moment, but their legs didn't seem to be listening to their minds. It was then that the most unlikely person ran up and jumped in front of the three children in frightened determination. Naruto blinked without a change of expression, although his eyes lit up softly in an intrigued manner. He slowly lowered his hand and stared at his teammate with interest. Sakura, nay, I never would have dreamed of facing you here, he spoke up lowly. Said girl suppressed a shudder as she looked back into those cold eyes. Her arms hung outstretched in an attempt to shelter the kids from any harm. They were only children, so she would protect them from her teammate, even if she were helpless to fight the demon child. Her emerald eyes softened considerably. She looked as if she were about to cry, but still that hard-on look of determination kept on her face. But really, would Naruto be seriously willing to attack three kids in broad daylight? She wasn't sure anymore. Naruto, please, they're only kids, she pleaded suddenly. The boy looked back at her without so much as a blink in consideration. Is there a point anywhere in that statement? If not, I advise you to step aside. Naruto, they've only begun their lives. Give them a chance to live them out, the girl answered quickly. I won't let you harm them. This actually caused a small chuckle to draw out of the boy as he crossed his arms. Poor thing. You really are determined, aren't you? And you are one of the few who I don't really want to kill, so I'll consider letting you and those brats go. If you get farther than I care to follow, then you can live. Sakura seemed speechless after this was said, but she didn't hesitate for long. She turned and ushered the small trio to run around the fence corner before following them closely. If there was one thing she knew about her teammate, it was that he stayed true to his word, no matter what it was. Even as immoral and malicious as he was, Naruto was not a liar. So the four had run. They had run as fast as they could. That is, until Konohamaru rounded the next corner and slammed into someone's leg. Falling back with a small oomph, Konohamaru rubbed the back of his head roughly before looking up at the barrier while the other three stopped behind him. Two genin looked down at the Hokage's grandson in slight annoyance. Sakura observed quickly from their headbands that they were from Suna, a completely different village to the southwest. Still, The thought of Naruto finding them not very far from where they had left stayed in her mind, and she bit her lip anxiously as she looked at the foreign ninja. Not another moment passed before the one Konohamaru had slammed into growled down at the boy. That kind of hurt. Moegi and Sakura gasped slightly as the genin picked the boy up by his collar and glared at him expectantly. I said, that hurt you little shit. Ugh, the small student bit out as he kicked his legs in an attempt to escape. No. Let go of me. Stop it, Kankuro, you're going to get us yelled at, the girl beside the black-clad 13-year-old pointed out irritably. It was my fault, Sakura proclaimed suddenly. I'm sorry. We were just messing around. But he was the one who slammed into my leg, the genin named Kankuro answered curtly. Therefore, the midget should apologize. Besides, I want to play around a bit before Gaara gets here. Stop. We're gonna get killed if you don't let go of me. He's after us, Konohamaru shouted in his struggle. This caused both foreign genin to look at him with slight curiosity before something small collided with Kankuro's hand. Son of a. The kid fell to the ground as the rest of them looked up quickly. Sasuke glared back from his branch with another small rock in hand. What are you bastards doing in this village? Sasuke-kun, Sakura exclaimed in slight surprise as he crushed the pebble in his grip. The foreign girl looked at him for a moment before a slight blush tinted her cheeks. Her supposed teammate narrowed his eyes at the boy as he held his wounded hand. Letting his hand drop to his side, he growled, God, they just keep multiplying. Get lost, the Uchiha ordered bluntly. You're just another midget that pisses me off. Get down here. I hate show-offs like you the most, the older boy replied with a small glare. Sasuke growled slightly from the shot at his pride and flickered down to land in front of the foreign ninja. Standing up straight, he glared at the slightly older boy with malice. Behind him, Sakura shook slightly. Naruto was still a factor in this situation, and the four were only a single route away from where they just were. If they stayed here, Sasuke and two other genin who shouldn't even be in the village would get killed as well. I hate little punks like you that are rude. It makes me want to kill them, especially if they're midgets, the boy pointed out while fingering the strap that hung over his right shoulder. Beside him, the blonde sighed in annoyance before turning the other way. If they ask, I wasn't involved in this pointlessness. You're just a foreign bastard who shouldn't even be here. Don't challenge those who most likely might be stronger than you, Sasuke replied quickly. The girl looked like she was about to answer before her teammate cut her off. Our business shouldn't be a concern of yours. I'm not even sure you're worth telling. Leaf genin are weak. HN, says the genin who just got bettered by a pebble, the other countered with a slight smirk. That's it, you annoying little idiot. A punk like you should learn too. He was cut off as soon as a light flicker sprang to life directly between the two arguing genin. Both jumped back as another came to view, and Sasuke's eyes widened generously when he recognized who it was. He could hear Sakura run in front of the three academy students behind him protectively. He blinked when he heard the small, too late, sound from her lips. So, she knew he was going to show up. What happened earlier? I must admit, I am a little disappointed. It looks like you didn't even try to run, came the drawling voice as Naruto looked up at the four behind Sasuke, hands in his pockets, and I have to say, I'm a little insulted as well. Get caught up flirting with Uchiha? Wait, Naruto, please. We just ran into another punk midget here to piss me off. What the hell were you six doing anyway? Playing hide and seek? Really? Leaf genin are nothing but a bunch of jokes. Kankuro cut her off with his arms crossed, obviously annoyed. Sasuke's gaze immediately averted to the boy with surpassing irritation. This guy had no idea who the hell he was talking about. With Naruto here, Sasuke wouldn't be surprised if he were killed in the next second, but yet, he didn't want blood on his conscience. Sure, they didn't have a good first impression, but Sasuke didn't know the guy well enough to let him die. At least they were safe at the moment. Not even Naruto would attack in broad daylight. So with grit teeth, He spoke up. Shutoop, you idiot, you're eventually going to get us all killed. He shouted angrily, avoiding his teammate's eye. Are you kidding? By this kid, he's even shorter than you. What makes you even think he can touch me? The other answered arrogantly before taking his left hand and making almost a pulling gesture with it. For a split second, Naruto looked as if he were about to fall forward onto Sasuke, that is, until he disappeared in the next moment. Everyone blinked in shock while Sakura and Sasuke looked around blindly in fear. It was when the foreign girl visibly stiffened that Sasuke's eyes landed on the blonde behind her. It's not the size that counts, you little shit. The pair whirled around before jumping back to land on either side of the other two genin with a slight surprised yelp. Naruto stared at all of them with a bored expression. Sakura still stood protectively in front of the three who seemed too frightened to take the chance and run. Sasuke looked at his teammate in a ready position, prepared to protect the others and pull back if things were to go wrong. The other two were still winded from the sudden appearance. What the hell? Kankuro muttered under his breath. That recovery and speed was inhuman, his teammate stated lowly as she stared at the boy. I see what kept you, Sakura. I'll let you and those brats live for having a convenient reason for not running very far. So, why don't I just kill these two in your stead? He asked suddenly with a bit of venom tipping his tongue. Wait, Naruto. Be rational. They're not from this village. They don't know. Sasuke answered quickly while taking a step forward, besides, it's broad daylight. And why don't you shut the hell up? You're an embarrassment to this village, the blonde countered ruthlessly. His arms remained crossed as Konohamaru and his friends finally took his subtle permission to leave. Sakura remained where she stood, determined to help Sasuke if he needed aid, but she really wasn't sure how she could help against Naruto. The Jinchuriki looked up with his bored stature unbroken, honestly, standing up for foreign genin that shouldn't even be here. That's laughable. Are all you leaf genin this clueless? See the passes. We came here to take the Chunin exams, Kankuro spoke up with a small ferocity to his tone, and now if you don't mind, I think I'll have some fun beating the shit out of this kid. Sasuke and Sakura watched incredulously as the slightly older boy swung the small mummy-like figure on his back off his shoulder. Even his teammate shared the other two's expressions. You're going to use Karasu? She asked in surprise. What the hell does it look like, Tamari? He responded impatiently. Kankuro, stop. The four turned to look behind them at a young redhead with a gourd hanging from his back. He was most likely the third member of their team. Both Sasuke and Sakura were a bit preoccupied with his darkly lined eyes to notice much else. Oh, hey Gaara, the genin waved as if nothing of the slightest were happening. Sasuke also took to mind that he hadn't even noticed the boy approach until he called out to his team member. His stealth was almost as good as Naruto's. Sorry to you guys, the one named Gaara nodded in both Sasuke's and Sakura's directions before walking to stand to the right of Tamari. He nodded in Naruto's direction as well, but the blonde didn't even seem to notice, and to you. There was a slight pause before he looked over at the boy who was currently replacing a ribbon-clad figure back onto his back. We didn't come here to play around, Kankuro. In relation to what that leaf genin said before, you're starting to look like an embarrassment to our village. Whoa, what? Hey, I know why we're here, but that one kid started it. He pointed out childishly. It doesn't matter who started it. You went along with it. Tamari spoke up in annoyance. You three are annoying. The abrupt interruption actually caused the team to jump slightly before turning to see the blonde boy suddenly standing between his two team members. The three could scarcely believe it. He had moved 4 yards and straight past them without so much as a warning. Gaara stared blankly at the genin. Who was he? Sasuke, Sakura, let's go, we have a mission, don't we? Naruto began to ask before turning to leave. Besides, I think I'm catching stupid. This earned a small growl from Kankuro and a small smirk from Sasuke as he and the Haruno began to follow their teammate away from the other team, but it was someone's, hey. Wait, that made them stop and turn. Naruto didn't. He merely stopped, slightly irritated already with this wasted time. What? He asked impatiently as the slightly older sand ninja behind them stepped up with another growl. Kankuro took a small breath to follow up on his call before Gaara unexpectedly asked his question for him. "Who are you?" he asked slowly, staring at the back of the boy's head. Sasuke and Sakura didn't answer, knowing full well that the question was directed toward their teammate. Instead, they stood and waited patiently for Naruto's answer, but all they heard was a cold, growing snicker. When his laughter died, he turned slightly to give the team a fanged grin. "You know, it's pretty rude to ask someone's name before giving your own." Both Kankuro and Temari's eyes visibly widened at the sudden unique trait to his grin. The aspect to the boy's character, added to his recovery and speed, pointed the two to the final answer as to who, and what, he was. The redhead himself let his expression break for the first time in years. His eye twitched from seeing the boy's sadistic smile, but he shoved it away as a small mistake. And it was hesitant, but Gaara finally replied to the boy, "Sabaku no Gaara." Naruto's grin merely widened. "Uzumaki Naruto." The redhead only nodded before the leaf genin disappeared. Looking to his right, he observed Temari's gape. Looking to his left, Kankuro grit his teeth in shocked frustration. It was then he figured they knew something that he didn't. He had to admit, the grin threw him off when thinking he was a normal genin, but what sort of epiphany did it cause to have in his siblings? Knowing they probably wouldn't tell him at the moment, he settled the truth for later. Meanwhile, 3 other genin sat and watched the entire thing from a shaded branch. So how about it? There was a miscalculation. The Uchiha was assigned to the same group as the Kyuubi. This could prove difficult to reach him. And that one with the gourd had stealth similar to the Jinchuriki. For now, we'll just have to keep an eye on them. "You're late, Kakashi-senpai." "Forgive me, I got lost on the road of life," Kakashi answered with his favorite book in hand. A seething Sakura glared up at their sensei impatiently. "Stop making us wait, you liar. Whatever the hell you're doing, do it when we're not supposed to meet up." Sasuke and Naruto leaned on the bench a good distance apart. Honestly, they had never been on good terms, but now Sasuke loathed the boy entirely, and Naruto scarcely cared. About a week ago, they had been tricked into taking an A- rank mission that was said to be AC rank after Naruto insulted the mission probing staff enough to piss them off psychologically. They were assigned to escort an old man named Tazuna to the Wave Country so he could build a bridge to another island. The 5 ended up being tracked down by a hired former swordsman of the Hidden Mist named Zabuza. He and his apprentice, Haku, fought the team in order to assassinate the bridge builder. Naruto, impatient with their assaults, killed Haku in their final battle on the bridge Tazuna had been building after the apprentice nearly killed Sasuke. But after Haku spoke of his past, Naruto felt pain ram through his chest from their similarities, and soon after the boy's death, Naruto told Zabuza off for his cruelty. The man who had hired Zabuza in the first place, Gato, showed up to kill Tazuna himself. The reverse psychology Naruto had pressured onto the swordsman caused him to instead kill Gato and several of his henchmen, although the multiple stabs Zabuza took had caused him to die anyway beside his apprentice. Naruto, unable to witness the feeling of love physically, began to walk away without so much as another word after telling Sasuke off for his weakness when fighting Haku. And even in spite of the cruelty he had shown on that day, Tazuna had seen how Naruto converted Zabuza with only a few words and saved the rest of them from the battle. Thus, he named the bridge after the young blonde without his notice, knowing that the title would bring his people luck. And Sasuke couldn't help but feel inferior. His life's goal was to destroy his brother, but with Naruto beside him, we couldn't help but always feel insignificant. How could he hope to defeat his brother if his own teammate could take him down in no more than 5 moves? But returning to the present, Kakashi looked at each one quickly before flipping out 3 sheets of paper. All 3 looked at this with slight confusion before Naruto suddenly spoke up. You nominated us to take the Chunin exams, he pointed out mildly. He was slightly surprised. They were rookies. Not many fresh genin took the Chunin exams right away. Good observation, Naruto. Yes, I have in fact nominated you guys. Here are your applications, he answered with a small smile shining in his eye. Each took one hesitantly before looking over the sheets. Their expressions even seemed cautious. Kakashi opened his mouth to begin explaining the situation. Whether or not you want to take it is up to you three individually. If you do, sign the application and turn it into room 301 at the Ninja Academy tomorrow at 4. Take your time and think about it, guys. This was only a nomination, he informed placidly before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Sasuke thought hard about it as they began to leave. Maybe he would be able to fight Kankuro, or even Gaara. Sakura, on the other hand, lagged behind a bit as the boys walked on in silence. She could barely keep up with Sasuke and could barely even dream of keeping up with Naruto. Would she even have a chance to pass? She walked on reluctantly. The next day, this is the second floor. Naruto kept his eyes on the group of genin a couple yards ahead before shrugging. Sasuke looked up at the sign quickly after Sakura pointed the genjutsu out. So, they were giving a pretest to those choosing to take the exam. The team resumed their stride until finally joining the group, Sasuke leading the other two a step ahead. They came just in time to observe a genin clad in green being knocked away from the illusion-induced room labeled 301. Two genin standing in front of the room with smirks glared down at the others with disgust. Weak, one pointed out shrilly, the Chunin exams aren't a game. What makes you think little punks like you can pass? The way you're beating them around, you'd think it were a game, Sasuke spoke up with a slight smirk. Everyone turned to stare at the team before a majority of the genin backed up after having the Uzumaki catch their eye. One team of genin and the two guarding the door stood their ground as Sasuke glanced at the sign once more. The other remaining team, which included the green-clad ninja, looked back at them in curiosity. You can cut the crap now. Remove the illusion and let us pass, the Uchiha ordered placidly. Turning his head slightly, he winked at his pink-haired teammate for informing him of the genjutsu. She seemed a bit shocked at the gesture before her cheeks were quickly tinted with the color of her hair. He looked over at the two who were recently beating the other genin back. This is the second floor. There was a pause before a rumble of chat immediately rose up from the crowd that had backed away earlier. It wasn't long before Naruto grew impatient. If you won't get out of the way, then I'll just have to make you, he hissed slowly before removing a clawed hand from his pocket. And no, that's all right. You can pass, the two spoke up defensively before letting the genjutsu break. Naruto actually gave them a disappointed look before replacing his hand and striding past with his teammates following. You people get less fun every day. The team who had recently stood their ground looked after the team with interest. The boy with long hair actually seemed a bit winded. With only a small movement, that blonde child was able to get past. Who was he? Apparently, he wasn't to be messed with, and that look his teammates' eyes made him turn immediately. Lee, don't try it. That boy isn't a normal genin, he ordered sternly. The boy looked back in frustration. With only a single gesture, those two did not even hesitate in letting him pass. Who is he, exactly? Yeah, Neji. It looks like they were a rookie team. You ever seen them before? The single girl on their team queried suddenly. That was Kakashi-sensei's team, Neji finally answered. The other two looked at him in curiosity. How'd you guess? She asked with a furrowed eyebrow. Guy-sensei described them to us a couple days ago, he answered regally before following the team to the third floor as the other genin trailed behind. That is correct, meaning that one genin must be Uchiha Sasuke, the last of his clan, Lee piped up with excitement. I wonder what it would be like to be involved in a clash of youth with him. The adrenaline would be outstanding to fight with the legendary Uchiha bloodline. Maybe I should go ahead and... Lee, Neji just told you not to try it. You're not going to get him alone with his teammates around. And that one guy, there's something just not right about him, the girl spoke up before trailing off hesitantly, something about his eyes. Yes, I saw it too, Neji added as they walked. Lee looked at the both of them before sighing in defeat. You are right, Tenten-san. It will be a fight saved for another time. So, you're saying if I chose not to take it, Sasuke and Naruto wouldn't have been able to either? Sakura asked suddenly. I'm not so sure that would have been a bad thing, Sasuke thought suddenly before looking over at the blonde. I mean, if Naruto becomes a Chunin, he'll have more freedom than he already has. Already, no one in this village can really touch him. If someone were sent to assassinate him, it would backfire the moment he sensed them. Naruto kills at will. People have been disappearing, and there's not really anything we can do about it. The third even refuses to send assassins after him, and I'm not even sure why. Surely, there has to be someone out there who could beat Naruto. His thoughts were cut off quickly from his sensei's sudden remark. With all of you willingly taking the exam, you are now able to take it as a group. Take it as my proud team. You guys are my soldiers, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Now go. Sasuke blinked. Are you serious? Kakashi looked back with his eye in an upturned, you, dead serious. With that, the team strode past their sensei and into the room, where a plethora of rival genin sat and waited. Gaara observed the other genin with lazy eyes. Kankuro and Temari were conversing quickly a couple feet behind him. Their words were panicked and hushed. They had been talking ever since that moment outside of the academy yesterday morning. Something about those leaf genin had them anxious about the exam, and Gaara was tired of being kept in the dark. He turned around and walked over to his siblings with a raised hairless brow. What are you two talking about? The pair immediately hushed as their brother joined them. Kankuro stared in mild surprise as Temari shifted her eyes away with an expression of guilt. These reactions piqued his curiosity further before he crossed his arms. Well, he asked patiently, something about those leaf genin has you uneasy, and I want to know what. Both looked at him with grit teeth. It seemed that whatever guilt was washing over them, they were failing to hide it. He narrowed his darkly lined eyes at their hesitation before speaking once more. Is it about him? Uzumaki Naruto, you know something. Both eyes snapped up to meet Gaara's teal ones before deep sighs sounded. Yes, Gaara. It's about him. I noticed he was not a normal ninja. But if that one aspect has had you talking for 2 days straight, I would like to know what you know. Gaara, it's kind of hard to explain, Kankuro pointed out as he rubbed the back of his headdress. Then explain it in the best way that you can, the redhead replied without missing a beat. There was another sigh before Temari spoke up. Well, as you know, the tailed demon, Shukaku, was sealed within you as a baby, right? His eyes narrowed further before merely giving her a nod. Well, Shukaku, quiet down, you worthless bastards. Everyone in the room turned as soon as the smoke filled the room. There were quite a few coughs and gags before the smoke cleared. Gaara kept silent, clearly frustrated that he would not be able to hear what his siblings were going to say until much later. Turning to look over his shoulder at the coughing pair, he narrowed his eyes before muttering, "We'll talk later." There were 2 nods before he looked back through the clearing smoke. At the front of the room, a horde of ninja clothed in gray stood with a scarred muscular man in front. He smirked at them all before lowering his head a bit. I should thank you for waiting. I'm Morino Ibiki, the examiner for the Chunin exams, first test, in which we will now take, he stated with his grin growing. Excuse me, but you will not be seated in this room as you are. Instead, all of you will draw a numbered tab and be seated in the position assigned to you before the test papers are passed out. Gaara sighed. What kind of test was this? A Chunin did not write out much paperwork or anything, so what was the point? What questions could they possibly ask that could not be answered physically? He heard his siblings sigh along with him before they lined up to draw tabs. He lined up behind his siblings, but what caught his eye was the genin 2 people behind him. Uzumaki Naruto. He had that same look in his eye as before, and Gaara recognized it well. He had once held the same look, and he couldn't even say it was even a look, because it was one that was dead. His eye twitched in memory before quickly whipping around to look straight ahead. Gaara stared at the woman as if she were a two-headed freak. Her eerie grin caught him off guard, and her sudden entrance nearly made half the room fall off their chairs in surprise. The examiner he had come to know as Morino Ibiki glared irritably from behind the banner she had jumped in with. She had claimed to be their second stage examiner, and honestly, Gaara was not looking forward to it. She was too loud. "You have excruciatingly bad timing, Anko," Ibiki growled as he stepped back into view. Said Chunin examiner glanced back at him rebelliously before looking back at the genin-filled room with a small frown. 78 got past. "What the hell, Ibiki? What did you even put on that test? Hey, let's just say a lot this year have the ability to pass this time," the man shrugged with a slight grin. Anko snorted with a twist of her head as her hands rested on her hips in annoyance. "PFF'd, whatever. There won't be half as many anyone once I'm through with him." Gaara raised a non-existent brow. "Che, all this talk is getting annoying," Naruto growled as he crossed his arms. This earned him a momentary glance from the Chunin examiner as she strode through the crowd of genin. Her eyes settled on him for quite a while before a small smirk curved her lips. "HN." She turned and continued her stride in the next moment, as if the eye contact had not happened at all, but her thoughts said otherwise. "Uzumaki Naruto, huh? Hey, I'm liking him already." Meanwhile, Sasuke studied every trait he could observe of the caged forest in front of him. The arena seemed to be about 20 kilometers in diameter. A river ran through it, more than likely for survival purposes. The trees looked ghostly. Something told him that anything but the natural dwelled under that canopy. He grimaced. "Anyway," a booming voice interrupted his examination, "it's time for you guys to fill out a form. Don't worry, it's not difficult, it's just, people die in this exam. This form is an agreement that declares I won't be responsible for 'em. Fair's fair, right?" Anko grinned crookedly as everyone stared, but even then Sasuke and Naruto had to smirk a bit. She was a smart woman. She didn't move to pass them out yet, so everyone waited silently, knowing she had something else to explain, but whatever, right? "You can sign that crap later. Now I'll just explain the test so you guys can get a feel for it all." And that's where Naruto's mind drifted off in dead boredom. Honestly, everything Anko said had nothing that kept him interested. He caught a few words, but he barely cared to really even understand them. Something, ultimate survival, something, take place, practice arena 44, something, big tower. He yawned indifferently as Sasuke and Sakura seemed to be listening intently to the rules beside him. Naruto snorted. "Something, certain task, no rules, scroll battle, something, heaven, and earth, scrolls, something, 13 of each, half will fail." Okay, yeah, he was pretty much tuning her out. So instead, he decided to look around at the competition. Seeing all the nervous expressions almost made him laugh out loud. God, they were pathetic. The time limit she had just been talking about had no effect on him. It was all too easy to simply kill a team and take whatever the hell they had to take. And the other rule for disqualification, you cannot look inside the scrolls until you reach the tower, Anko's statement processed in his mind suddenly. Maybe it was because she had moved directly beside him. He tilted his head to look up at her curiously, almost challengingly. "And what if we do?" She looked back with a slight grin. "PFF'd, try not to find out." Naruto growled. She blatantly refused to answer his question, which caused him to be a bit ticked off as she strode confidently away. That's it, she just made his list. Sasuke groaned. It wasn't looking too good for him and Sakura. The woman had successfully separated them from Naruto without breaking a sweat. 1. The Uchiha had been pretty much depending on the Jinchuriki's instincts to get them through the test. It was selfish of him, he had to admit, but he didn't have time to mess around and play ninja with all these kids. He had to get through these exams as quickly as possible, but now Naruto wasn't here to speed up the process. Now, it all relied on Sasuke. Sakura was still shaking as his hand covered her mouth nervously. They were hiding behind the trunk of a tree, and Sasuke couldn't help but feel like a coward. But they had to run. There was no way they could fight someone like her. MMFFF. Sasuke-kun. Snake. Shit. Naruto stalked through the forest in boredom. He figured he'd let Sasuke and Sakura fight on their own. He didn't have time to baby them, so when they got separated by that snake, Naruto killed it immediately and snuck off without so much as a warning. He wanted that Earth scroll now. It was then a team of AIM ninja caught his eye in the distance. They were setting traps to capture unsuspecting teams as they flew by, gathering scrolls the subtle way. He almost smirked. Too easy, he muttered as he strode in their direction. They obviously weren't close-range fighters, but most likely genjutsu types, which Naruto wasn't prone to fall for with his sinister eyes. In the next moment, he disappeared with the three-rain ninja oblivious to his threatening chakra signature. The leading one murmured orders without focusing on his surroundings. He breathed heavily through the steel aperture covering his mouth before having a slight rustle of leaves sound closely behind him. He spun around vigilantly with a kunai out and ready, but no presence met his gaze, nor could he feel one. So, shrugging in discontent after a moment, he turned back around to continue tending to the traps they were setting up. At least, until the same sound caused him to glance at the patch of bushes to his right. He lifted his kunai again, paranoid. Is it a squirrel or something? The genin thought hesitantly. Another rustle and the kunai was thrown without a second thought. His ears caught a dull thud of metal against ground before more movements were heard behind him, making the ninja throw another. Someone was messing with him, and it didn't take his teammates long to notice his struggle. At every crackle and hiss, the three of them threw their weapons, but to no success. They weren't hitting anything, and it was beginning to have them scared of what was out there. Another movement, and the last knife was jerked in the direction they were pretty sure the sound came from, but this time, a tan hand jutted out and caught it before it could even disappear into the greenery. A golden head slowly emerged in front of the dubious group, a maniacal grin set on his face. I'd give you a hint that using all your weapons on an enemy you can't even see is pretty damn stupid, but you won't have a chance to look back on it later, would you? Naruto began with his canines already growing. The three stared in shock. What was he? Nevertheless, they didn't let their guard down, and the leader smacked his hands together immediately in defense. Haha, for an idiotic midget, you have some nerve to underestimate us. Ninja art. Haze clones. About 60 or so clones rose from the ground, surrounding Naruto in the next minute. Looking around at them all, he only sighed. Hey, tell you what, if I can't beat the shit out of you three with my right arm alone, I'll pretty much lead you to my team and give you our heaven scroll without a fight. How about it? I'd say we have a deal, the AIM genin replied before attacking him from behind without warning, but don't get cocky. Time almost stopped for the blonde. They were in his world now, and they wouldn't be getting out. Every gesture, every blink did not go unheeded by the leaf genin. Nothing they did went without detection. His hands had already changed at his sides, and his eyes were already scarlet. Naruto smiled all too ominously before dropping the kunai he recently acquired, spinning around, and grabbing the victim's neck in a death grip at the last second. Claws were hooked within the ninja's neck without much effort. He had been foolish enough to expose his real self on the spot, and Naruto guessed he did because the clones the group had created weren't solid. Knowing this, Naruto grinned dangerously up at the stranger in his grasp. I wouldn't even dream of it. Blood curled around his fingers before the genin threw the other harshly into a nearby tree. Another team member instantly came and attacked him from the side after seeing this. attempting to hide his assault behind a clone, but the Uzumaki caught this without much difficulty. Ducking as the foreign ninja dove for him, Naruto shot his hand up and thrust it into his abdomen. His fist vanished within the next split second, scarlet liquid coating his arm desperately. The Rain Ninja gasped in shock and pain as Naruto's fingers tickled the bottom arch of his ribcage. The blonde lowered him down until his feet touched the ground and they stood face to face before giving him a blood-curdling grin. Then flexing his fingers with a jerk, a deafening crack was heard before Naruto sent him spinning into a tree trunk 20 yards off. The last teammate hissed, biting down his fear, before sprinting at the young killer in vengeance. The clones camouflaged his attack from amateur eyes, but Naruto's sight was far from untrained. His orbs glinted crimson ever so slightly before Naruto spun his body out of his opponent's way at the last moment. Then as the genin was thrown by his own weight past the other boy, the leaf ninja struck his jugular vein with a bloody hand. The blow was enough to make his throat bleed internally, and Naruto could care less. Instead, he strode casually over to the leading Rain genin, still breathing hoarsely from his neck nearly being crushed, and fished out what seemed to be an earth scroll. Naruto looked it up and down suspiciously before smiling slightly in satisfaction and hiding the scroll within his left pants pocket. He glanced down at the 3 genin half alive and gasping for breath on the floor around him before snorting in disgust, rubbing the blood on his right hand off onto a nearby tree. Weak, he growled in dissatisfaction before stalking off with his features already returned to normal. He didn't walk 10 yards before coming to a slow halt, a small smirk gracing his expression. Glancing around at the vacant landscape surrounding him, Naruto's eyes glinted a sinister red that allowed him to see every fine detail around his position, and soon brushing off his shoulder, he patted the pocket the earth scroll resided in and grinned even wider. If you want something, it'd be better if you say so, Naruto began as he identified the 6 chakra signatures present carefully. It's the dickless bastards that piss me off. And hearing the beatings of your hearts, it's not hard to figure out what you're thinking. He could feel the signatures twitch and fidget in shock and only smiled again. The blonde took a couple steps toward a patch of brush before sighing in disappointment. You know, when a heart beats faster, it's not just the breathing that follows the pattern desperately, the vein in the throat is pushed with the most stress. The muscles within its walls tense, and the channel inside it becomes swollen and small. I'm not surprised if you know this already. It causes the need to cough so that it can open the vein back up, but that's not why it's my favorite fucking vein to rip out of the people I kill. Oh no, it touches nearly every vital organ in the human body in some way, and like how the spine is the pillar that holds your skeleton together, that jugular vein is the gateway all the other organs depend on the most. He paused for a moment, letting the information sink in for the 6 he could sense near him. He could hear their breathing getting faster, their bodily functions matching those that he had just described. 3 of them were only a few feet away from his grasp, and they knew it. And you know what happens when that gateway is suddenly ripped out? He asked suddenly, raising an eyebrow to no one in particular. That insane amount of pain racking your body is the most anyone can possibly feel in their lifetime. 5 seconds of mutilation turns into hours of suffering within the mentality of the person. But hey, the killer was suddenly gone in a flicker of movement. The blonde soon reappeared in front of the team he was not nearby earlier, hands resting serenely in his pockets. Naruto looked from the cerulean-haired girl to the canine-induced boy until his gaze finally rested on the genin he recognized from the Aburame clan. They were in his class at the academy, he noticed, but made no sign that he had. What should I know? It's not like I've been there, he finished sadistically. The small dog with them shivered uncontrollably in his master's jacket along with the kunoichi to the blonde's left. The 2 brunettes looked up with fear flickering in their dark eyes. Yes, he knew every single one of them. From left to right sat Hyuga Hinata, Inuzuka Kiba, and Aburame Shino. Naruto looked like he was about to continue with something else, but never had the chance. A female scream was heard in the distance, and the genin immediately recognized the syllables in his name. Sakura and Sasuke weren't too far, and the girl seemed pretty desperate for his help. Cocking his head a little bit, the Jinchuriki sighed irritably, glaring down at the team he was so sure he would have the pleasure of ripping apart. After another call for aid, Naruto took a step back to return, but before he did so, he saluted them all with a fake grin, "We'll talk later." And in the next moment, he was gone. Kiba's shock was evident after Naruto departed. He was amazed his dog Akamaru didn't relieve himself on the Inuzuka from sheer horror, because he wasn't so sure that he himself didn't. Gaara heard his siblings let out the breaths of air they had been holding, but he refused to relax just yet. In fact, he hadn't even noticed he wasn't breathing. That genin, that killer, was probably the most horrifying person he knew, but it wasn't the fact that the blonde was a mass murderer. It was because of the actions he was taking. The similarities between what that blonde was now and what Gaara expected himself to become were painstakingly accurate. What if he had become that? Would he kill most everyone who would get too close in his village? Would he be so cold and unable to feel any emotion other than hate? Would he be that powerful? The thought made him shiver. Everything he had just witnessed was anxiously familiar, and the Uzumaki was hovering right over them as he discussed how horrible physical pain could really be, but even though it seemed that's all the blonde was explaining, Gaara could decipher the hidden explanations. Naruto wasn't just describing physical torment, he was reminiscing on some sort of mental pain he had felt in his past. Pain only Gaara himself could understand. He had the same look in his eyes. "Gaara!" The redhead jumped as his siblings practically called his name in his ear. He spun his head around to gaze at them as if they were the two most unfamiliar people in the world. Kankuro prodded him gently in the shoulder in attempt to snap his little brother out of his recent trance. "You all right? He's gone now. You can breathe," he proclaimed somewhat dubiously still. The boy let out the breath he had not noticed he was holding before blinking up at the both of them. They were the two that had acknowledged him. His family that saved him from himself, saved the genin from becoming him. And for a rare moment in his life, Gaara was obliged to let them know he acknowledged that. "Thank you, Aneki." Temari and Kankuro sat speechless. Naruto growled irritably for the umpteenth time. He was truly surprised when Sakura had the courage to call him for help, but that surprise had not shown in the slightest. Their situation had been understandable. True, the blonde had not been there for the fight or saw the woman they were fighting, but the look in Sakura's eyes when she explained it was sincere. He snorted when the girl claimed the killing intent in the woman's eyes was almost as bad as Naruto's. And scoffed when the pink-haired Kunoichi requested help carrying an unconscious Sasuke. Nonetheless, he led Sakura to the nearest shelter they could find with Sasuke on his back before taking a seat a couple yards outside. Sakura made sure to keep her distance, knowing the blonde was pretty much ticked off that the group had lost their heaven scroll. After a moment or two, Naruto left without another word, leaving the girl to fend for herself and the subconscious Uchiha next to her. To her ignorance though, she had no idea Naruto was still with her, using herself and the boy as sitting bait for other genin to come after. So instead, Sakura focused on setting up traps around the tree they were sheltered under. As she finished, she returned to treating Sasuke, her eyes glancing at the new triple-marked insignia on his collarbone. That genin, that thing that attacked the pair earlier, was no ordinary ninja. Orochimaru, she sounded, the syllables slithering off her tongue in disgust, parting gift. Sakura looked to the mark again and grimaced. A cursed seal, but exactly what was it doing to her teammate? Sasuke seemed fine. The pain he felt earlier was subsiding and only hints of it were made through slight shivers. Nonetheless, the Haruno frowned once more. "Sasuke-kun, you're gonna be all right. I'm here. I'll protect you. You just relax. You'll be fine," she began softly, soaking his head with a hot moist towel. "Hang in there, Sasuke-kun." The small rustles of an approaching rodent made her jump and cease her futile soothing. Her kunai was already out and ready, but she hesitated as she saw a small squirrel run toward their shelter. The kunoichi let out a small sigh of relief before an epiphany hit her, and she threw her weapon immediately before the mammal could get any closer. Frightened by her sudden assault, it retreated the other way without a second thought. Sakura sighed in relief once again as her trap remained unfound. That was close, she frowned again before glancing at her unconscious teammate. Not close enough if you ask me. Sakura whipped her head around to see three ninja with headband insignias she couldn't recognize. They were obviously from a newly found village. She held her breath. Defending her teammate alone was not part of her agenda. Do us a favor and wake up Sasuke-kun for us. It's time to bring his life to an end. It's nothing personal, we're just following orders, the one in the middle continued curtly. That note on your forehead protectors, you're the sound aren't you? The pink-haired ninja exclaimed suddenly, you're Orochimaru's cronies. What the hell did he do to Sasuke-kun with that mark? Why fight him if he's already out cold? There was a brief widening of eyes before the same sound ninja spoke up once more. He's thinking something strange, isn't he? Either way, we have orders, the male ninja on his right interrupted suddenly, I'll kill these bastards in one move. Easy, Zaku, the other stopped him, go too fast and certain things that go unnoticed will cause your downfall. After he said this, the genin lifted the patch of grass to reveal one of the many traps Sakura had planted. She grit her teeth in response. Her plan to protect Sasuke was failing quickly. And all in the meantime, Naruto watched from afar, only encouraged to make any sort of move when he thought it was needed. He was curious to see how this girl could manage against three obviously experienced ninja. There was no way he could deny it. Naruto was impressed. Not in any lifetime would he ever imagine Sasuke having that sort of power. In 5 minutes at most, he took out all three of the sound ninja. Sakura and a boy named Lee sat badly beaten a couple yards away with Team 12 and Lee's team standing a ways away in shock. The marks of an evil seal covered the Uchiha's entire body, and by this time, Naruto was smiling maniacally from the show. A sickening snap sounded and the blonde even laughed in amusement. The sound ninja known as Zaku fell to the ground with his arms stretched and broken. The kunoichi known as Kin had already been maimed before Sasuke awoke. Now all that was left was, you, Sasuke drawled out in a poisonous hiss, you're next. The last foreign ninja known as Dosu widened his eyes in fear. He could sense the boy's immense power, and he wasn't all too favorable of the idea of being beaten like a rag doll, but he had no chance to run. He couldn't escape. The boy was taking slow, careful steps toward him, and he had no idea how to defend himself against this monster. Being the head bastard of that team, I hope you'll be a bit more interesting to fight, the Leaf genin pressed with a fanatical grin. His eyes were wide with a lust for power, and his chakra was whipping about without restraint. And Sakura could feel herself begin to cry. Sasuke-kun. This wasn't the boy she knew. This was a sinister embodiment of that damned mark. Somehow, the genin she knew and loved was being pushed away, and she couldn't endure the sight. Stop. And just like that, Naruto's joy and excitement came to an end as the Haruno embraced the cursed boy with all her strength. Sasuke, too taken by surprise, only froze in her arms. Sakura cried into his shoulder without hesitation. She wanted her teammate back. Please. Slowly but surely, the curse mark began to recede, and Sasuke's skin began to return to normal. His eyes lost their Sharingan insight, and soon he fell back on the ground in exhaustion. Sakura kept her arms around him with tears still running down her face. All the other Leaf teams merely stared in even deeper shock than before, and Dosu was left to sigh in relief. It seems I miscalculated again. You are indeed strong, Sasuke-kun. He withdrew a little bit before reaching down to pick up his teammates, but I'm afraid we'll have to carry this on at another time. Don't be so confident you'll show up, an ominous voice murmured suddenly before the sound genin whipped around in alert to see a certain blonde behind him. A clawed grip embraced the ninja's face in the next second, drawing blood from the deep punctures Naruto's nails brought on. Everyone was watching in horror, but the Uzumaki took no notice. He had had enough of watching the torment Sasuke bestowed on them from the sidelines. Now, it was his turn. With one arm alone, the Leaf Genin raised the other into the air by his head, and Dosu was struggling in vain to break free. Now, just like his teammates, he was about to be dead. Naruto's hair ruffled and his canines lengthened immediately, a transformation Sasuke and Sakura were used to seeing by now. His eyes became alive with killing intent, and no one had the courage to look